Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Is the video team ready? Yes, I think so. Good morning. I hope that you've all risen and shine nicely. This is a lecture about, well, as the title says, actually the title is doing the heralding, a hacker's guide to surviving in the corporate world. Peter van Eyck has been working as a researcher and as a consultant in large companies. He's been writing columns and articles about his work, and he's going to talk about how the data that is being amassed and developed and controlled within companies is actually supposed to stay there, and how we can make sure that it does that and doesn't sort of escape with data breaches and everything. The floor to Peter van Eyck. Enjoy.
So, can everybody hear me in the back? Can everybody hear me in the back? Now I hear myself in the back. Great. I hope I can live up to all the expectations that Karen has given, but let's give it a go. I want to start with a little story about my vacation. A couple of weeks ago I was in a guest house in the middle of Europe, about 1,000 kilometers away from here. And I was there with my family. We were just finishing the morning coffee. And then my wife said, they're wrapping up the breakfast, and then my wife said, well, let's go outside and finish our coffees outside. And I said, well, my cup's empty. And then my 16-year-old daughter says, well, there's still a bit of coffee left in the pot over there. And I said, well, I'd rather wait a minute because there's a fresh pot of coffee coming up real soon. And then she says to me, Daddy, you are a nerd. Now, why would you be saying something like that? The guest house is a service provider in a way, and it has a part of its service is that you can get coffee. You just pick the coffee, it's self-service. But I didn't want to have just ordinary coffee, I wanted to have fresh coffee. But there was no special, there was no regular coffee, no fresh coffee, so I had to figure out the organization of the guest house to find out how I could get the fresh coffee that I wanted. So in a way, I was hacking the organization. And the funny thing is that my daughter also understood this real quick. So I guess she's also a nerd. But she's still in denial. So what I want to go over with you today is how can we look at large corporate organizations from our perspective, from the way that we look at the world, and how can we make those worldviews more compatible. And everybody has a different view, literally, of large organizations. So what I want to do right now is show a few pictures, and let's raise hands if you think that this is a picture of this could be a way of looking at an organization. So what about this one? Yeah, if you think it's familiar, raise your hand. If you think an organization could look like this, well, same set of hands, I think. What about this? Fewer hands. So you're not in the war zone then, yeah. But what about this? Those are very few. This is a neatly organized, everybody contributing its own part. You must be living in the real world. What about this? This is corporate world. You don't think so? Not anymore, yeah, that's right, yeah. What about this? Okay, that's your favorite corporate world, I understand, yeah. I think my point of view is that this most accurately resembles a productive way of looking at the corporate world. And yesterday I was surprised a bit that Arjen Kamphuis showed the same picture by the same Dutch 17th century painter, Bruegel. In conjunction with his talk, it was like hacking government and government policies. If you haven't seen it yesterday, you should go back to the slides or the presentation, because he has a number of interesting points to make that are sort of adjacent to my story. But rather than the metaphor goes deeper than just, okay, we have this tower and there's people that spoke different languages and that's why it was never finished. Let's dive into the text that describes this. It's in one of the early books, the first book of the Bible, so even then it was already a mess. People said, well, let us build a tower whose top may reach unto heaven, right? And let us make us a name. Now, that's in our current days, that's still a valid a metaphor for what people are doing with organizations. People are bringing or are creating organizations because they have ambitions. They want to get something going. They want to get something with their name on it, or they want to be part of a thing that's larger than themselves. But you should keep in mind that it's always the people that have the ambitions with the organizations. Organizations are not natural people. So if you think the organization thinks this, the organization does that, think twice, because there's always people or a number of people behind that. And I hope to be able to go into that in a little bit more detail. So another verse says, well, they used brick for stone and slime for mortar to build this enormous, huge structure. And I'm not very proficient in pre-Christian building techniques, but what I get out of this is that they had to work with the materials that were there, and the technology that they had at that particular point in space. And the current day translation of that is that in organizations, people have to work with technology, and that technology brings its own risks. And I'll come back to those risks, because especially for you guys, that's a very important theme in organizations. And so the Lord found out that they had one language, or that they were building this huge thing, and apparently he thought of it as some sort of a threat. And he said, wow, I'm getting scary, because if these guys have a common language and a common purpose and a common goal, then nothing's going to stop them what they have thought out to do. And that, for me, that means in our current day that whenever we need to be able to do something together, we need to have a common language. We need to be able to talk to each other. And being able to talk to each other gets us into a productive mode. And the converse I will come back to later. But it's slightly more complicated than this. So what God did, or he did, I'm not sure what the right word is here, it said, well, let's confuse this, because we don't want this. And now I'm not let's say, religious person. I don't know if there is a God. But I do know that a lot of things are happening that are not necessarily explainable, and some people attribute those to God. So probably that's what happened here. My take is that misunderstandings are they come up out of nowhere. And in every organization, you will have misunderstandings automatically. I mean, you start with a common idea, and then it sort of diverges. Now, I'll come back to a point later where I say that this diversity does have its own benefits. But if you don't see that, and you don't manage that, then you will have a serious problem. So, what happened after the language was confounded, was spread out? They left building the tower because they no longer had the capability to coordinate that work. But the Bible says they left off to build the city. So, after all, even with their common language taken away, or maybe because their language was taken away, the common language taken away, they were able to achieve things. Now, I'm not going to go through the rest of the Bible, but I think these are some interesting ways of looking at that. So, my talk is about large organizations. And since you're in this room, I assume that you have worked for, or within, or as a contractor to, large organizations. I have for the greater part of my professional life, and I know it can be very painful. That's why I'm bringing my lessons to you, and hope that you can avoid some of that pain. And it doesn't really matter if it's for profit or non-profit. Size matters. You know? Large government organizations have the same types of power struggles, the same types of problems as profit organizations. Generally speaking, the diversity within profit organizations is greater than against non-profit organizations. I also assume that what you're trying to do in your work is related to technology, it's related to the potential things that you can do with technology, and for a lot of you it's also related to what the risks of that are, and the way that we sort of underestimate or overestimate those risks. So if you don't recognize that, then feel free to leave. Just don't make too much noise. But this is my assumption about you. So the first question, if you're an independent thinker, and most of you are, I think large organizations are inflexible, inefficient. How come they still exist, right? Well, this sums up a number of the lessons that I've learned, and there's actually quotes from somebody else, but large organizations, sort of, once they get going, nothing's going to stop them. It's harder, in large organizations it can be very hard to start a project, but it can be even harder to stop it. And for a metaphor, if you just go out hiking or do whatever, on your own, you go quicker, because you're not held up by the slowest person in the group. But with a group, you can carry more, you can divide more work, and in the end, you'll end up further if you want to. So what I'm going to try to give you is what's the data model of an organization, or parts of it, because it's way too big. How can we program the organization to get out of it what we want to get out of it, like the coffee story I told earlier. And what are the typical bugs and problems that we see in organizations? Of course, this is all my personal view and experience, and I have the story to share with you. Most of you will probably disagree with parts of it. That will be an interesting discussion tonight at the bar. Right now, this is the story. Feel free to think otherwise. So, what about what you can call the data model of organization? What's it all about? Well, one way of looking at it is that large organizations exist because there was a power structure, and the power structure holds it all together. If there's no power structure, it falls apart pretty soon. What is this power about? Well, it's about allocating the resource, like the money, the bright guys, all the stuff that's an asset of the organization. People, process, all technology. And it's a finite resource in general, so you have to allocate it over bits and pieces of the organization. And it's the power structure that describes how that works. And the power structure also allocates the risk associated with handling those resources. And I'll come back to that later. But if you drive this to an extreme, then what you see in some organizations is that power is used in a perverse way. Let's say that somebody says, well, I think the world looks like this, and I want you to think the same thing. And that's where it gets beyond being productive. But it happens because the Winston Churchill once said, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And when the checks and balances are not in place, that kind of stuff can happen. Now, we all tend to think of power struggles as getting in the way of what we try to achieve in organizations. But I think they're inherent in large organizations. If you don't have a power struggle, that means that the organization does not exist, in a way. Like Scott McIntyre, it's a parallel with what Scott McIntyre said yesterday. If I don't see a denial of service attack on my network, then the internet is probably down. Right? So these power struggles, they pop up all the time. That's the dynamics of how the world moves forward. And if you carry them to completion in a productive way, then they lead to a decision and a common goal in the organization that allows the organization to move forward productively. But when that process gets stalled in a way, then it can actually paralyze the organization's progress. A client that I worked for half a year ago or so had a situation like this with their IT department and the telephone department. They both they were confident that they would need to have to build some kind of common infrastructure. They wanted to do a lot with wireless access. And neither of them was big enough to get the money to do it themselves, because there was a huge building and they need 4,000 or 5,000 access points. But they kept disagreeing on how they would start doing that, what the priorities were and what the technology choices were. And that had stalled that decision for approximately 2 years. So there was 2 years of no progress because of this power struggle. And with the, it wasn't what I did, but it was what somebody else did, and I just helped them. They resolved this power struggle, and then everything went downhill from there. It went smooth as a ride. So resolving those power struggles is inherent part of making progress in organizations. Now, I'm getting back to risks. I promised that to you. What are the risks in an organization? Like, well, you should know, adopting new technology, developing a new product, entering a new market. These are all risky things for organizations because they can fail. And if they can fail, it means you can lose money, or you can lose, you even can go broke. And if you're a government organization, you can sort of get voted away or eliminated. So it's a risk. And organizations hate that risk because it's a threat to their existence. Every risk means, every single bit of risk can sort of explode. We all know the stories, like, well, and these days it would be like, if an organization doesn't have internet for a week, would it still exist? Right? That's a risk. But on the other side, organizations, if they're smart, they also love risk, because the risk allows them to, it's what differentiates them from somebody else. They dare to take a risk, and they know how to take it better than somebody else. And that makes them unique, that makes them earn their existence in a way. So there's again, this leads to a power struggle. You know? And to get into that, the name of that game is risk management. And it's a game, yeah, really, sometimes. When one department tries to offload a risk to another department, or part of the risk, you have the upside risks that I think, there's the risk that this product is going to sell like hotcakes. Well, it's a risk, you know, technically it's a risk. And you want to have that risk, but you don't want to have the risk of all the investment that goes with it. And this can lead to perverse situations. And the most prominent example in our current history is, of course, the banking crisis, where the banker said, well, I'd like to take the positive risk of getting a nice bonus at the end of the year, and you get the negative risk of me going broke. And everybody did at the same time in a coordinated way, in a way. So somebody has got to manage this. Now getting back to my metaphor of programming the organization, I'm going now in a little bit more specific case studies, although I can't always name organizations and specific projects. But all these case studies are from my own experience. For example, you're building a system in an organization and you need some sort of regular data feed, like who works here, or what's the status of all our systems or whatever. But they are not your systems, or that's not your responsibility. What do? Well, you can sort of hack your way into that, but it's smarter to sort of to find the owner of that data, because every bit of data should have an owner. And talk to these people and say, well, I want to have an agreement with you. I want to sort of specify the way that you're going to deliver this data to me. What you do in return is a different story. But if you really have to specify in a lot of detail how the data is going to come to you, by pigeon mail or by FTP or whatever. You have to specify that in a lot of detail. And you also have to specify all the exception conditions, like what if you don't deliver? Who can I sort of escalate to? What if I find out that there's a piece of data wrong? Can I actually send it back and will it get fixed so that I don't get the same shit all over again the next time? And that SLAs, that service level agreement should be as precise as a piece of code. Should not lead to any misunderstandings. Because again, it's the misunderstandings that are leading to the problems here. Another interesting thing that I ran into I think it's a good example for the people here in the room, and some of you will know this from experience, but for the one or two of you who don't, let me explain this. So the security policy in an organization, and I'm talking about IT security policy right now, is that it has to be there, because if it's not, you're going to get a power struggle. And how is it developed? Well, senior management, the CEO typically only says, well, it has to be, well, we want it to be safe, yeah, and we want it to be efficient as well. Then the business side is that, well, we want these desktops, and we want them now, and we want people to be able to install all kinds of software on them because they need it for their work. And then there's a project that says, I have a deadline, I need my users to access this system and that system, so please open up the firewall pronto, and otherwise I get in trouble, and if I get in trouble, you get into trouble. This is typical power play that's being played by project managers that have too much money. And on the other side, there's typically the system administrators who say, well, if we get a break-in, who gets fired? Not you, me. So I'm going to sit on my firewall even if it's the last thing that I do. Right? You remember the picture of the guy in the trenches? That's life of a firewall administrator sometimes. So this leads to a power struggle, because who gets the way, right? If you leave it to the business, everything will be wide open, and then a year later everything is bug infested, so it has to shift to the other side, and then they close it all. That's not productive. Somebody, if these parties can negotiate that, then that's okay, but typically they can't. Ideally, you would have a document that says, and somebody responsible for that document says, this is the security policy, and yes, I know that this is a risk, but we do that because there's the reward. And if the risk is that we lose a few PCs or we lose whatever, look at the business and the efficiency of working. An example would be like remote work. I mean, how much functionality do you give to people who work remotely? You don't want to sort of have open access to the entire network. That's too risky. But you don't want to close it down either, because that sort of cuts everybody off. Now, that exact agreement is the result of a power struggle by these parties. And if you resolve that properly, then you don't have a problem anymore. But yeah, well, if you run into that type of problem, think about the power structure and the power struggle. So another interesting thing, what's going on here? Is that my microphone? Well, we all know, in a large organization like 10,000 or 100,000 people, there's all sorts of computer systems, and it will be efficient and convenient and a number of other positive good things that if there's a single digital identity, like one login for all systems. That does not necessarily mean single sign-on, but it's one single digital identity for all systems, which means that you only have to provision it once. You can revoke it if it gets compromised. You don't have, you know who has the rights to all systems, and you can sort of for the risk management. That's a really good thing, and it's more efficient. Why does it not happen in large organizations? I have not recently seen a large organization with a single digital identity. There's always some system, there's always some extra somewhere. And the reason for that is that's an unresolved power struggle. For example, who provisions the digital ID? Traditionally, it's the IT department. But, the human resource department is really responsible for who works here, because for compliance reasons, they have to know who works here. And if you have a digital ID on a system, then in a way you work with or for the organization. But who works here is a very fluid thing. You know, does the janitor work here? Does the consultant work here? Yeah, well, one of them has to have access to the system and the other not. And external clients, it's a definition thing. And everybody has their own definition of who works here. Although that really reminds me of a joke that I think my father told me about the large corporation where he used to work, where there was a foreign visitor to that department and to that organization, and he asked, "Oh, how many people work here?" And then my daddy's boss said, "Well, about half of them." And another interesting source of power struggles within, say, the IT realm is, does the idea come from the infrastructure, like, say, a Microsoft Active Directory for the desktop, or does it come from the application people? And for the identity, it's one thing. It's typically a problem with the rights. The point is that, especially those large ERP projects, they are way over budget. So it doesn't matter how much it costs, and they're also always short. So who's laughing here? Well, I heard this funny noise. So they have too much money to resolve all problems, so they sort of barge along. So, well, it's my way, or you're out of here. And system administration is typically understaffed, under budget, overworked. Does that sound familiar, anyone? So don't necessarily have the power to react to that. And that's one of the reasons why you'll end up with a login for your Windows domain, and then another login for your, let's say, for your financial application, and another one for your benefits. It's crazy. This is the way it works, and we'll consider this a bug. Now, suppose you're responsible for, or you want to really do something innovative, like moving from steam to electricity or something like that. Then bear this in mind. Organizations are dependent on technology, most of them anyway. And once that is a bit stable, they tend to be very risk averse for trying out something else. I mean, we had organizations run on mainframes for ages, and that was a pretty stable environment. And some of those organizations, when PCs were coming up, and some of you might have been alive when that happened, some of those organizations actually had active policies against PCs. Like, no PCs in this building. But they came in anyway. And the same thing is with one of my pet peeves, again, IPv6. IPv6 is in the long run the better solution, but nobody dares switch over. If you want to know more about that, come to the workshop tomorrow. Again, there are some people dating back centuries who saw this all coming. And my favorite here is Machiavelli. And there's a quote from the Prince that says, "Well, there's nothing more dangerous to carry out, or more or more risky in uncertain of its outcome than to initiate a new order of things." And why is that? He said, "Well, this new order of things has people that would benefit from it, but in those people, you will only get lukewarm defenders because they don't know for sure if that new order of thing is going to benefit them. Whereas the people who benefit from the current order of things know very well what they're going to lose if that current order of things is going away. So you will have very strong opponents in them." So once you get in this type of stability situation, typically an organization cannot get out on its own. And if it gets out, it's because somebody in the skunk works has this idea, starts working on it, convinces his manager that it should get some funding, but then the manager says, "Well, yeah, well, sort of go ahead, but don't be too explicit about it, and I'll stuff it on the maintenance or whatever." So he sort of hides that, but you additionally need somebody really higher up in the organization who sort of covers that manager. And when things go wrong, and he sort of protects that guy. When things go wrong, he sort of also protects him. He said, "Well, I know nothing about it, and I'm going to make sure it doesn't happen again." And it sort of doesn't fire the guy, but gives him a nice other job or whatever. So it has to be deniable on senior management. It's too bad I don't have a very good story about that. Well, I have too many of them, but they're too explicit. But keep this in mind and think back on the really successful innovations that you've seen in your career and see if you can see this pattern. And I'd love your stories tonight. Now, my final case study is a bit longer, and it's about how to get things done in terms of IT in a large organization. And that's the final story. What we were doing was connecting up a number of departments to a central email relay. Email relay, not an email system. It was just relay, like think SMTP, not POP or IMAP. And these were departments that currently were communicating over the internet to each other, and that was not considered a good long-term solution. These departments, like 20 of them, ranged in size from 30 people, like 30, and 50,000, so that's like more than 1,000 times bigger. And basically what we had to do was connect each of them to the same system. So it was the same change all over again, but then 20 times for different organizations. Now, I consider that a pretty unique experiment in finding out what works in getting things done of this nature. Well, I'm going to give you the outcome already, but I'll go into a little bit more detail on the next slide. This entire change, which basically is connect up to a server, change a few firewall rules, and do some test. I think it could be done in 6 days, given the size of the organization. On the average, it took 225 days. And the funny thing is that the size of the organization had no correlation with the elapsed time. So, as a matter of fact, the largest organization and the smallest organization were the ones to take the longest time. In the middle was slightly quicker, it was like 200 days. And why is that? Obviously large organizations, the larger departments were a lot less flexible because they had procedures for everything. But on the other hand, they actually had people knowledgeable. And they had procedures to do things. They had a form that said how to request a firewall change. And a form that worked, rather than a form that says, I want to change, and here's a free text where you can sort of say, well, fix me. The small organizations obviously are a lot more flexible. Oh yeah, we're going to do that. And I'll immediately talk this. I know everybody here, so that's... But it turns out that then there's a system administrator, and I'd like to call him the system administrator because he's the only guy. He has to work on Exchange, he has to work on all the databases, he has to work on all the desktops, he has to work on the firewall, etc., etc., etc. So he has too much work and not enough space in his brain for all the technical details that you have to understand. So let's dive into the numbers a bit more. What we did after the fact was sort of go back in the process and figure out what the most high-level steps were. Well, from the moment that it was decided that we should be doing this, the first job is to get a face-to-face meeting with somebody in that organization responsible for doing it. And then you have to talk to these guys and other guys, and there were a few women also. Actually, they were the smarter guys. And then to design and plan the entire thing in conjunction with their architecture. And then if you say, well, this is what we're going to do, these are the changes that are required, to change there, change there, change there, then you have to sort of get it to the operational side. And sometimes that's an outsourced vendor or a supplier, or it's a different department. And getting that assignment signed off is another significant step. Then you have to, then those people have to execute the change. They have to do it, basically. Then you have to change, then you can test if it works across the entire chain of hardware and software. And then when that's all signed off, you can actually decide to go live. And then obviously after you go live, you still have some time to wrap up some final issues. As you can see from those numbers, our planning was good because, and our preparation was good. There were hardly any post-go live issues. Well, the numbers, the fastest department did it in 141 days. the slowest one to actually finish was 371, and at the time of that analysis there were a few that were not finished and were taking longer than that. That's more than a full year for simple change. You see what types of deviation there can be. It's incredible. I was really amazed. So getting into the details of these steps. First meeting. Well, it turns out that for a number of organizations, it can be pretty hard to find a responsible person who says, well, I own the email system. We had a situation where we said, well, the email system, well, I need to figure out who owns that. Well, we have it, and somebody's worked on it, but everybody denies that they're responsible for them. We have to talk to, who can we talk to about the security policy? Because there were some minor things that needed to be changed in the security policy. Again, in some departments, nobody was responsible. So they had to figure out who to talk to. And then, what we also had in a number of situations was that, say, the senior guys who sort of told us to go do it, that level of that agreement on the senior level did not necessarily translate into cooperation at the next lower level. Where somebody says, well, yeah, my boss can say that, but we shouldn't be doing this, for example. Now, that can take 148 days. Okay, then we do design and planning. Now, what are the issues there? It's finding the competent people. I was amazed, and I still am amazed on a regular basis in large organizations that there's a lot of smart guys out there, but there's an awful lot of people who don't know what they're doing. And they're the majority. That's why I get paid to do all that stuff. Finding people to actually talk to, and then when it gets a little bit bigger, such an organization, then you have a supplier that says, well, we run this, right? So if you want to change it, you have to discuss it with us. And I say, okay, well, let's discuss. Yeah, but we need an assignment to work on that. Yeah, okay, you want an assignment? We'll give you an assignment. But before we can give you an assignment, we have to have some clue as to what it's going to cost us. Yeah, well, we don't know. We need to figure out. No, okay, go figure out. Yeah, but for that, we need an assignment. That can go on for a couple of weeks or months. And then once you say, okay, this is the design. Here's the design. We know all the changes. We know all the stuff that needs to be done. And then say, well, yeah, okay, this is the assignment, but we're not signing off on that assignment. First, we have to have permission there and there and there and there, and somebody has to look at again, that gets incredibly complex. So it's a similar catch-22 situation. Or that's not the only problem that we can have, but that's one of the more frustrating ones. And that's typically an example of a power struggle that does not get resolved. And so there's a power struggle between the supplier and the demand side. And now if the people higher up who should resolve that don't understand that, then you're stuck there. And that can go on for. We can do it in the same afternoon. You know, we had situations where we talked in the morning, and in the afternoon it was all written off, signed off. And then doing the change. This was really funny because we're basically talking about 1 or 2 rules in the firewall, right? That was the most complicated thing, and then there's some other stuff. Out of 20 organizations, there was 1 that could actually execute that as planned. And they could plan it 4 months in advance. They said, we came in September and they said, I said, when can you do that? Well, they looked, December the 7th. I said, what, not earlier? The other guys can do it in a week. Hey, take it or leave it. Come December the 7th, you had to split it up in 3 changes. December 7, tack, 1. December 8, the next one. 9, the next one. Brilliant. Half of these organizations could not even give a planning at all. Well, we're going to work on it. Let me get back to you when we can do it. And then some of them said, well, actually, we have done it already. And then you have to clean up the mess that they've created. Again, and what's the sort of root cause of that? Typically, again, it's a qualitative or quantitative lack of resources. So they don't have the people at all, or the people are not smart enough, or the people are smart enough, but the procedures are not there. Welcome to IT and corporate environments. So then it's testing, and testing, yeah, we could do that in a day or in 2 hours actually. But if it didn't work, if sort of stuff went wrong, we could go on it could take months before we could actually get all the people aligned to do the testing simultaneously, because that was a bit of the problem, that you have to check on a number of locations at the same time. Again, are all those people available that you need? And they're always overstretched. So then the final slide of this example, going live. Obviously, if the change is there, flip the switch and we're in business. Well, the reason why it took 2 days is because we did that go live every 2 weeks. So they actually had to wait until Friday to do that. Otherwise, they could have done it the same afternoon. That's the quickest guy. And the department that took the longest, well, I must say the department that actually did it took the longest, because there's another department that's still waiting to do this. It's still counting up, so the next time I can give this talk, it's like 300 days in the middle. And then what happens is yeah, we're all set and we're going to do this, and then, oops, do we really want to do this? Then so all our mail is now dependent on this connection. I'm not sure we want this. And then, well, all sorts of glitches that can go wrong. So basically, that's that example of how I learned to survive in the corporate world. This was a successful example. I won't bore you with the unsuccessful ones. Well, maybe tonight. And then there's the shameless plug. You can find all this stuff on the speaker info at the website, so you don't need to type it over. And I'll happily take any questions that you have for me. Who has the mic? Who has questions? There's a question over there. There's a question over there.
Hi, yeah, thanks. Great stuff. One question I have is, I'm working for a fairly small technology company, 40 people maybe.
Yeah.
And we supply sometimes middleware systems for very large organizations, for example, mobile operators. And I'm working as a project manager on these projects. And it's sometimes very hard to communicate with our client, because they gave us the assignment to do it. And then we get overwhelmed of tens or 20 or 30, even 40 people all communicating to me because they want something, and I really don't know who has the power, who's the one I need to talk to. Sometimes they even involve other external parties who are talking to me. And do you have any advice on how I can canalize this communication with a large organization as being a supplier, maybe?
Yeah, that's a very good and interesting question. Did you hear that in the back? Otherwise, I'll repeat. Well, you're on the right track because you already diagnosed the problem. So you almost know what to do already. You need to have somebody senior at your organizations talk to somebody senior at their organizations in order to establish a more coherent and smaller interface between your two organizations, and actually escalate any exceptions to that. But these guys need to be responsive, and if they don't want that, then you, as a project manager, you have to say to your boss, listen, you're not giving me the material that I need to work with. If you can't resolve this, then my project will be delayed. And it's too much if you have 40 people to talk to on the other side. It's way too much. If you talk to 5, it's already a lot, and they should coordinate that internally. It's an indication of their own immaturity in handling this, and either they should acknowledge that, or they should ask you to sort it out for them. And in that case, you have more work. And if you get paid for that, that's good. There was a question over there, I think, in the middle.
Simple question. I just didn't get the add up of the numbers.
Sorry, I can't hear you very well because the other speakers are there. Wow. Yeah.
It's a very simple question. You showed a slide with the numbers, and I didn't get how it added up.
Let's see, back to that slide. Right. Right. So it is. So you're probably concerned about these three numbers. Yeah. So the minimum is the minimum for each phase. So that phase, there was somebody who could do it in 3 days, and all the rest took longer. And overall, there was the quickest department to go through all steps was 141 days. So there was somebody quick on each step. There was somebody quick, but there was nobody quick on all steps at the same time. Yeah.
Anybody else?
More questions? No. There goes my joke.
You've mentioned the SLA system, and I think it can evolve into a bureaucratic system that you can't get anything done for months, and then when the protocol changes have to be made overnight, a senior manager calls you and says, "Okay, I give you the root rights, and fix it, because otherwise we will lose 300,000 euros."
Yeah.
So what's the benefit of the SLA if it's so easily dropped?
Well, I'm not sure if I completely understand your situation in detail, but when emergencies arise and on a senior level people understand that there is an emergency, then that can override any agreement that you've made on a lower level. I have an agreement with my neighbor to not break into his house, but if there's an emergency like fire or something like that, I think he agrees that I will break into his house. But maybe we should discuss this in a little bit more detail offline.
Well, I think that the SLA, there has to be some kind of a measurement, a quality measurement, that you can figure this out in a very early stage, because otherwise you have this SLA and it is a kind of block and stop procedure, and doesn't give us anything.
Well, I'd like to get into more details of this. I'm not sure we have the time right now. I'm sure this will make an interesting discussion, because getting good SLAs is an art and technology in itself, and there's a bunch of rules that don't fit in one slide. So I'm sorry I have to leave it at that for this particular topic, but get back to me later. Any more questions? No? And for all the questions, that's the answer. Thank you for your attention.
Ja.
Doe de volgende dan maar.
Ja. Ja.
Zo.
Goed.
Ja?
Ja, ik vond het leuk. Het ging veel meer over macht dan ik had gedacht.